What's up, everyone? Welcome to part 2 of building this Star Wars Pit Droid for the mascot for the Starlight Digest podcast. Yeah, there's no turning back now. Let's just go. Okay, to just recap, part 1 of this build series was the why I was doing it, plus the printing of the files and assembling them. And now we're going to move on to the pre-painting phase. Before we get into painting this, the Pit Droid, we are going to do a lot of post work on it. Post printing work on it, right? So that means getting rid of all the print lines, getting rid of all the seam lines that we have glued two pieces together, and to make it look almost like it was plucked out of the movie and built and displayed for everybody for us to see, right? So I will say though, this is probably the most tedious part of any project, cosplay or prop building that I have experienced and will experience, because as hard as it is, and it's just the repetition of it, I want to do more, right? I'm not discouraged at this process whatsoever. So before we get into it, we're going to lay down some a kit, right? Like the Tashi Station Maker's kit that I put together that I use, right? So I do want to stress that everything that you see here, or what I'm going to explain, is the process that I do. There are many different ways to do things. I don't think there's any correct way of doing things, as long as the final outcome is something that you're proud of, right? That's all that matters. So the glues that I use, the filler primers that I use, the process of getting rid of the print lines, this is just my method. So I just wanted to put that out there, and I'm hopefully that anybody has any better methods, they will leave a comment in the comment section below, so I could incorporate that in future builds. So here it is. Here is the prop builder's kit that I put together. A quick graphic for you to look at real fast. I've been using these products for this current build and some of the past builds that I have done. And as we get into it, as the video progresses, as this part finishes up, we will explain in further detail as I'm doing it, to show you guys why I'm using the glazing putty, why I'm using filler primer, attack cloth, and of course safety, and what types of files and sandpaper I'm using. So how I like to approach any projects like this, where I want to get rid of any evidence that it was 3D printed at all, I break these down into phases. So let's start with phase 1. All right, so phase 1 is your filing and sanding phase. And this is your initial sanding phase. This is not going to be the one that the rinse and repeat. Okay, that comes later, because there's a lot of sanding. I think sanding is probably in every phase there is. But anyway, you're also going to take some small files, if you have any. Nothing really rough, just like little jeweler's files, something flat. And you're going to knock down any seam lines that have, you've glued two pieces together, and you're going to get those parts as smooth as possible. And if there was any kind of blemishes during the print process, you knock them down with the file system now. Anything you do now will save you time in the future, especially any kind of stubborn areas where if you had supports and it leaves a real rough area. Well, this is your time to knock it down with some files and some sandpaper, and get that as smooth as possible. What I do is I start with 150 grit sandpaper right now, and I use basically 150 throughout. And I go up when I'm into the primer stage right now. But 150 takes away a lot of material. I use PLA plastic, so it sands very well. And the one thing that you want to be careful, or I had to be careful too, is not take the sandpaper too aggressive to these parts, because if you do and you're trying to knock down something that's being stubborn, you could start exposing the infill of your parts, and you don't want to do that. You basically just want to get it down to a touch, or maybe a visual of layer lines, just to a point where, okay, cool, you're going to cover it with filler primer, and you're going to sand that away anyway. So the process of taking and adding filler primer comes later. But right now, the most important thing is to knock down any kind of blemishes, any kind of ridges, and get those parts ready for primer. All right, so phase two. This one's cool. I like doing this phase, especially when it comes to the glazing spot putty. Um, First off, safety first. Do this in a very well ventilated area. Use a face mask or a respirator if you have one, and gloves. You don't want to get this stuff on your skin for too long periods of time, right? This stuff is used for auto detailing when they when they're touching a paint for automobiles and everything. So this stuff is potent. It's also a form of Bondo, so it's going to adhere to the part extremely well. Now, I've seen a lot of people cover their entire prints with the glazing putty, and then because it sands so well. And yes, I have done this to a few parts on this build, but right now I really concentrated on seam lines and any kind of divots that I had to fill in, and what's it called? Print stepping when there was an angle in printing and it was the layers look like steps and it's too rough for sanding. I would just hit it with some glazing putty, and then I would sand away the when it was dry, and it was good that way. So yes, you could cover your entire pieces with this thing. Just if you're gonna lose some detail, if your parts have detail, we just have to spend extra time sanding away everything, and it becomes a pain. Don't use files when you're sanding the glazing putty or filler primer, because it's going to cake up and you're going to destroy your files. Use sandpaper, 150 grit at this point, and you'll be good. The second half of this phase right now, after you've or I've put my glazing putty all over, I start hitting with my filler primer. And I will do the initial passes with the filler primer. This gives you a great, especially in the light, because I use a gray. I don't use black or white filler primer. I use gray because that's a neutral color, and it gives you, the light hits it and you can see everything. You can see cracks, you can see divots, you can see hills, you can see everything you can with the stuff. So hitting it with a liberal amount of filler primer, because you really want to, cake that stuff in there for all the 3D print lines. And then, of course, let it dry. And unfortunately, I'm doing this in the winter time, so I'm taking almost a whole day in between spraying this stuff down and sanding. So it's taking me a long time to do in between. But you really do want to let it dry, because you're gonna just go through sandpaper like crazy. It's gonna cake up in it. So do your initial filler primer and Bondo. Get that Bondo in there, or the glazing putty. Get those in there, every spot that you need to build anything up, and sand that all good. Phase 3 is easy. It's easy because it's a short phase for me to explain it, but it's probably the longest phase there is to these projects. This is the rinse and repeat phase. Okay, everything I just told you to do in phase 2, you're going to repeat it to phase 3, to the point where you're satisfied, to a point where you don't see any print lines. You hit it, and right now I'm not using, in phase 3 I don't use the glazing putty unless I really need to. If there was like a dent or something I really need to fill that in, I'll do that, but you're very sparse on it, and you can see that when you're holding your pieces up to light. You can put it whenever you need to. But this is the filler primer sand, filler primer sand, filler primer sand. And again, be liberal on the amount of filler primer that you're using. It sands away, and the more you use, I mean, you don't flood it where you get drips, but you get to enough. You get enough on there where you can sand away and it doesn't affect the print. But anyway, yeah, the rinse and repeat phase. This takes the longest because, again, I'm doing this in wintertime, and when spraying these, I got to wait almost 24 hours. And I don't leave my prints outside in the sun. No, I don't care if it's cold outside or not. This is PLA. PLA has a very low melting point, and I don't want anything to warp. So I will leave it in the shade, but outside, and then the next day I will attack it again with sandpaper. But as many parts as this has, it takes me all day to sand everything anyway, and then go ahead and spray it with filler primer. So That's this phase. The rinse and repeat phase is probably the most frustrating because sometimes you feel like you've got it all, and then you sand it, and you're like, there's still print lines, or there's still an area that is stubborn. So, but take your time. I mean, this is supposed to be fun, right? This is prop building. All right, phase 4, everything is primered, built. You don't need to fill up any more holes in the thing, but your parts look kind of rough. Now, this is the primer stage, right? This is the primer stage. You're going to hit it with just regular primer. It's not filler primer. It's just a neutral color. Now, depending on how you are painting your piece, or in this case, I don't know how I'm painting this guy yet, because that is going to be in another video, and I'm going to need the Starlight Digest help for that. We're going to make a competition out of it and paint this dude up the way our listeners want it to be painted, the way our mascot wants to be presented. So the reason why I'm not primering this right now is because I don't know what the final paint is going to be. If I was doing metallic or chrome pieces on this thing, I would primer it in black. And because black, and then you hit it with any kind of like chrome spray, it brings out that metallic shine. So if you are doing a metallic piece, then hit it all with black primer. You will see the results are better when you're using these kind of chrome or metallic sprays. If I'm using just regular, just paint, say tans or reds or whatever, honestly, I just hit it with gray primer. It'd be fine. Not necessarily black, but gray, just to have a neutral color and hit all that stuff. So you should have a final paint model in mind when you're primering this thing. Otherwise, the default is just gray primer and then go on the paint. Another tip is weathering, right? So, and I think about these things as I'm doing this work phases now, because the more prep work you do here, the easier it is when it comes to weathering and painting and everything. So I think about this. This is a Star Wars project. And Star Wars projects are heavily weathered. They're heavily dented, scratched, beaten up or whatever. And I like to do actual weathering on my projects. Like I don't want to paint. If I can't help it, I don't like to paint on scratches. I'm going to scratch it on purpose. I'm going to expose that underbase, chrome, black, brown, whatever it is. I want to expose it so it's actual weathering, and the weathering tells a story, right? So I am thinking about these things before I go on to the painting phases, because the primering is going to tell a huge story later on, if that makes sense, which I hope it does. But again, I don't know what I'm doing yet until we get the painting scheme ready and done. And then I can finish the primering and then move on to the paint. So with that, I know I just kind of explained what the future is. The next video, the part 3, is going to be the painting of this dude, right? So, but I think the more I do these projects, the more I learn. The next one is going to be easier or harder or something that I can change. It all starts with the printing of it. Like, can I make these things easier to sand in the future, like an orientation where I don't have this rough patches where I have supports, because sanding supports were like just awful. So you take these projects and you learn from it, right? So you continuously do them. And then the next one I do is going to be like, okay, well, I didn't like that process last time, and so I'm going to change it up early on in the phase. So that's why this video is actually very important in the post process, right? But yeah, I mean, this is great. It's again, I hate doing this in wintertime. If I make one suggestion, just wait till spring when it warms up, especially if you're in an area where it does get cold. It sucks doing this outside in the cold. Your time is very limited. But anyway, it's still fun. It's still great. I cannot wait until we finally have a painting scheme to get this guy done. And then we're going to talk about electronics and the final details. And the final details of stuff I haven't been showing, which is going to be the detailed parts underneath the dome, the antennas, the nose piece, and any kind of lights that I'm going to do in this thing. Kind of putting that off into the end, but it is coming because I'm going to make this whole project worthwhile. It's got to be, right? So thank you so much. Like and subscribe if you haven't. Wait until part 3. If you want to be involved in the painting scheme, the link is in the description below to the Starlight Digest podcast, with Star Wars podcast. I'm one of the hosts on it, and we're going to be presenting the Pit Droid painting schemes, and you guys are going to vote on it, which is going to be awesome, and then we are going to paint it the way you guys want it. So thank you again, and yeah, till next time.